Top 10 gemstones that quietly replaced gold in private wealth. Gold is declared. It's measured, tracked, taxed, and stored under regulation. Its movement generates reports. Its value generates scrutiny. And in private wealth, that makes gold a liability. What replaces it isn't louder, it's quieter. Stones that don't sparkle on camera, assets that don't appear in inventories, value that's never declared because it doesn't need to be. These aren't collectibles. They're signatures, geological, unreplicable, and ideally suited to vanish from public record. They don't circulate, they anchor. In the next few minutes, you'll see 10 gemstones that haven't replaced gold in the headlines, but have already replaced it in the only place that matters, private control. Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Rank number 10, demantoid garnet, the wealth that wasn't tracked. It doesn't sparkle in photographs. Too green, too small, too quiet. But under natural light, in motion, demantoid flashes fire, not shimmer, but spectral bursts sharp enough to surpass diamond. First identified in the Russian Urals during the 1860s, this chromium-rich variety of andradite garnet was never meant for mass production. The deposits were shallow, the output inconsistent, and the material too unstable for most jewelers to work with. Even in its imperial prime, appearing in a few Fabergé creations for the House of Romanov, it was always used in moderation, almost cautiously. And when the revolution came, demantoid vanished, not with fanfare, but through silence. It wasn't looted or destroyed. It was stored, locked, misattributed in asset ledgers, or sealed inside safes that had no inheritors. For decades, demantoid remained a footnote in mineralogical handbooks. Admired for its dispersion index, avoided for its volatility, it fractured easily, resisted standard cutting angles, and rarely yielded specimens over 1 carat. However, that paradoxically made it ideal for private wealth. It didn't trigger customs reports, it couldn't be mass-produced, and it never created speculation bubbles. In Geneva, Zurich, and Antwerp, the stone quietly changed hands, sometimes as part of an estate liquidation, embedded in antique brooches stripped of their gold to avoid declaration. No marketing campaign ever revived it. No jewelry brand ever reclaimed it. And yet, among discreet European collectors, demantoid was never forgotten. By 2016, the situation changed. Small pockets in Namibia began producing new material. Not Russian, not imperial, but structurally similar. That prompted a re-evaluation of old holdings. Suddenly, stones once cataloged as low-grade green garnet were being pulled from inheritance archives and tested. Some were indeed Namibian. Others, unmistakably, came from pre-revolutionary Russia, defined by their characteristic horsetail inclusions, a mineral signature impossible to synthesize. And with that verification came repositioning. These were no longer curiosities. They became unregistered value, unique, irreplaceable, and entirely outside the scope of public financial systems. When a flawless Russian demantoid over 3 carats appeared in a sealed private sale in 2021, there were no photographs, no open bidding. 3 vetted buyers were granted silent viewing through bonded intermediaries. The stone never reached the catalog. The sale was never disclosed. The transaction never reached the open market. What circulated instead was a note, quietly passed through gemological circles, that no equivalent specimen had surfaced in at least 15 years. That remains true today. Demantoid garnet didn't replace gold by outshining it. It replaced gold by never being subject to the same rules. Rank number 9, grandidierite, the asset with no market. Grandidierite doesn't appear in museum catalogs or auction house retrospectives. For most of the 20th century, it existed only in textbooks, a mineral too rare to be of any significance. The first specimen was found in southern Madagascar in 1902, catalogued by a French naturalist, and shelved as a geological curiosity. For over 100 years, no gem-quality material surfaced. Even the most seasoned mineralogists had never held one in hand. But that changed in 2014, when a new deposit was identified near Tourmaline. It wasn't large, it wasn't stable, but it yielded enough translucent material to cut a few dozen stones. just enough to reach the radar of a different kind of buyer. Not jewelers, not museums, but those managing unlisted assets. Grandidierite has no global demand curve. There is no rapport, no price per carat, no brand storytelling. And that is precisely why it began to matter. A grandidierite above 2 carats with a uniform color, cut by hand in a closed workshop, doesn't require customs declarations or insurance registries. It is often hidden in personal inventories, family trusts, or offshore accounts. There is no auction history to benchmark its value, no certificate to authenticate provenance. Its value is derived solely from the impossibility of replication and the unwillingness of its owners to part with it. Among private collectors in Singapore, Geneva, and Dubai, whispers of double-digit carat stones persist, but no images exist, no public listings confirm them, and none have ever been offered in an open bidding process. What few stones have surfaced, usually under 3 carats, trade through discreet channels, often alongside rare watches, defunct banknotes, or bearer bonds. In one documented case, a sealed lot containing 4 grandidierites was sold in London in 2022 for an undisclosed sum. The lot was removed before the catalog went to print. Grandidierite is not a brand. It's not an investment class. It doesn't store wealth the way gold does. It evades wealth visibility altogether. Rank number 8, Red Beryl, the American gem that never leaves. Red Beryl doesn't travel, not through auction circuits, not across borders, not through luxury catalogs. Mined exclusively in Utah's Thomas Range, this gemstone exists in a world where geology, law, and wealth intersect, tightly controlled, narrowly circulated, and structurally isolated from the global market. Unlike ruby or emerald, red beryl is not found across continents. It forms only in a specific volcanic environment, characterized by low pressure, high temperature, and rich in manganese. And to date, that environment has only ever produced one viable mining site, the Ruby Violet Mine. Discovered in 1904, red beryl remained a scientific oddity for most of the 20th century. There was no commercial supply, no trade classification, and no gemological infrastructure to support its valuation. It wasn't until private collectors in the western U.S. began exchanging cut stones, often under 1 carat, that a parallel market emerged. However, it was never a traditional market. There are no official price charts, no standard grading reports, no established retail benchmarks. Instead, red beryl functions as a closed-loop asset class. Native to the United States, owned by Americans, and largely invisible to the world beyond it. When the mine changed hands in the late 2000s and commercial production halted, supply didn't flood, it dried. A few hundred gem-quality stones had entered circulation, primarily through estate transfers, legal settlements, or private purchases at mineral shows. Larger specimens over 2 carats were never offered publicly. Some were rumored to be held by Utah-based trust funds. Others reportedly passed to legal firms specializing in asset protection. But unlike emeralds, red beryl isn't listed in global trade bulletins. It doesn't cross customs lines or appear on luxury insurance policies. And that's precisely why it was adopted, not as jewelry, but as a form of private wealth retention. There is no international standard for red beryl, no registry, no certificate that travels across borders, and no market correction is imminent. The gem's entire valuation system is based on proximity to the source, to the owner, and to silence. In a world where gold is tracked, taxed, and stored under official declarations, red beryl remains unregistered. It holds value because it's immobile. It keeps value because it's American. Ranked 7th, demantoid garnet, the green flame of lost empires. It looks like emerald, but flickers like fire. Demantoid garnet, the rarest member of the garnet family, was once the favorite gemstone of the Romanovs. But unlike imperial sapphires or diamonds, demantoid never went mainstream. It never needed to. First discovered in Russia's Ural Mountains in the mid-1800s, demantoid stunned jewelers was something they hadn't seen before. Dispersion. Under light, it fractured white beams into rainbows, a visual trait usually reserved for diamonds. That optical fire gave it its name, demantoid, meaning diamond-like. But what sets demantoid apart isn't just sparkle, it's history. In the late 19th century, Carl Fabergé, jeweler to the czars, used Russian demantoid in imperial egg designs, weaving green flame into objects that symbolized political control. These stones weren't just ornaments, they were signals of state. Then the revolutions came, the mines shut down, and demantoid disappeared from the public market for almost a century. It wasn't until the 1990s that small-scale mining resumed, both in Russia and later in Namibia. But even today, gem-quality stones over 1 carat remain almost impossible to find. Those that do surface often carry a feature collector's prize above color or clarity. The horsetail inclusion, a microscopic plume of bisolite that proves Russian origin. Far from being a flaw, this mark functions as a birth certificate. Between 2005 and 2024, auction houses began quietly elevating demantoid lots. Growth was slow, steady, and nearly invisible. The kind of trajectory legacy investors prefer. Unlike stones marketed for their rarity, demantoid's value curve required no campaign. It rose on the strength of what it is, limited, traceable, and mechanically unmatched in brilliance. Today, demand comes not from trend followers, but from private curators and intergenerational estates. In Italy, heritage brands quietly use demantoid in one-of-a-kind creations. In Japan, certified Russian stones are presented in boxes lined with legal documentation and passed from mother to daughter, not as jewelry, but as a narrative. Demantoid won't headline a billboard. But in the rooms where legacy is planned, it already has a seat. Rank number 6. Tsavorite. The stone that supply chains couldn't touch. Tsavorite was never scaled. Not because it lacked demand, but because it defied every attempt at infrastructure. First discovered in the borderlands of Tanzania in the late 1960s and later confirmed in Kenya, this vivid green garnet lacked the political stability, geological consistency, and logistical support necessary for industrial mining. What few veins existed were fragmented, shallow, and embedded in geologically unstable terrain. They required hand extraction, personal risk, and negotiation with local powers. When Campbell Bridges, the geologist who introduced Tsavorite to the West, was murdered in 2009 amid land disputes, it confirmed what insiders had already known. Tsavorite could never become a commercially viable gemstone. It would remain wild, unregulated, and structurally limited. That limitation, paradoxically, is what gave it permanence. Unlike emeralds, Tsavorites are not treated with heat. They are not filled, heated, or stabilized. The color comes straight from the earth and cannot be replicated. Stones over 5 carats are nearly impossible to find. Stones over 10 carats are almost impossible to price. Most have never been sold, never been listed, and never been photographed. Their owners don't wear them. They hold them inside deposit boxes, trust inventories, or family succession plans. In markets like Dubai and Zurich, Tsavorite garnets are not found in auction rooms, but rather in portfolio briefings. They're used as wealth storage instruments, not because they're liquid, but because they're invisible. They fall outside regulatory regimes, insurance indexes, and custom scrutiny. There is no conflict of interest certification, no international agreement covering traceability, and because of their origin in geologically and politically fragmented regions, they pass through informal networks, carried by hand, exchanged through private counsel, and recorded only in internal ledgers. Tsavorite garnet didn't fail to scale. It refused to participate, and for those managing private wealth outside conventional systems, that refusal was exactly the feature they needed. Ranked 5th, Red Beryl, the American flame that burned out too soon. In the deserts of southwest Utah, beneath layers of rhyolite and volcanic ash, there was once a mine that produced a gemstone so rare that geologists referred to it as a statistical error. Red Beryl, sometimes called bixbite, though that name is no longer used, is the red cousin of emerald and aquamarine. But where emeralds are abundant in Colombia and Zambia, and aquamarines pulled from dozens of countries, Red Beryl has only ever come from one place on Earth, the Wah Wah Mountains of Utah. Discovered in the early 1900s but not commercially extracted until the 1970s, Red Beryl was immediately problematic for the gem trade. Not because it lacked beauty, but because it defied inventory. For every 150,000 diamonds mined, maybe one red beryl over 1 carat would appear. Most stones were tiny, heavily included, or fractured during extraction. Cuttable material was so rare that even experienced gem cutters were reluctant to work it. And yet those few that survived, clear, faceted, and deep raspberry red, ignited something the American gem industry rarely experiences: pride. A U.S.-born gemstone that rivaled the world's best in both color and rarity. By 2010, collector interest surged. Smithsonian and private museums acquired display-grade pieces. Elite jewelers began setting them as centerpieces, not accents. But in 2017, the mine changed ownership. By 2022, it was permanently closed to public access. New extraction halted. From that moment forward, the clock started ticking. With no new supply and no secondary source anywhere in the world, red beryl has quietly entered the category of extinct in the wild stones, a class usually reserved for historical relics like Kashmir sapphires and old mine Colombian emeralds. But red beryl is different. It's recent, modern. It belongs to this century, and yet it's already gone. Today, faceted red beryl above 1 carat with good clarity fetches prices between $10,000 and $50,000 plus, depending on origin traceability. But its value isn't just financial. In American private collections, it's regarded as a legacy mineral, something to be passed down not just for its beauty, but for what it represents: geological precision, absolute scarcity, and an end that came too soon. There is no lab-grown equivalent, no international mine waiting to pick up where Utah left off. Just a single origin and a sealed chapter. In a world obsessed with perpetual production, red beryl reminds us, true rarity doesn't multiply. It disappears. Rank number 4, padparadscha sapphire, the standard no one could agree on. Padparadscha sapphire was never fully defined, and that is what made it valuable. Somewhere between pink and orange, lotus and flame, it occupies a narrow chromatic range that gemological labs still struggle to classify. A sapphire that is too pink is rejected, too orange, disqualified, too pure, and it loses the interplay that gives it depth. The ideal padparadscha is always a negotiation, not just of color, but of origin, authenticity, and belief. First described in Sri Lanka, where its name derives from the lotus flower, padparadscha held ceremonial status long before it entered the gemstone market. It appeared not as adornment, but as inheritance, a nonverbal contract of balance, devotion, and female lineage. And even after global gem labs formalized its classification, the ambiguity persisted. Stones that one lab would certify, another would refuse. Some dealers used heat to simulate the hue, others dyed the boundaries. A few walked away from the category entirely, unwilling to trade in what could not be controlled. However, for private families, particularly in South and Southeast Asia, the padparadscha remained, not in inventory but in ceremony, engagement rings, dowries, quiet gifts between generations. These were not stones sold, they were stones absorbed. Their value never declared, their presence often unlisted. And that privacy became their most significant financial asset. With no international standard, there was no international price. With no commercial consensus, there was no taxation. Padparadscha became the rarest of commodities, a gemstone too culturally embedded, too color ambiguous, too personally held to be commodified. Among collectors in Singapore and Bangkok, padparadscha of Sri Lankan origin, untreated, unmounted, and weighing over 2 carats, is traded through legacy channels, legal firms, family trusts, elders. In one documented case, a matched pair was used to settle a cross-border inheritance without invoking any formal transfer of wealth. The stones moved, the value did not. Padparadscha sapphire isn't rare due to geological factors. It's rare because no system can ever agree on what exactly it is. And that disagreement made it perfect for those who never needed anyone else to validate what they already knew. Rank number 3, Alexandrite, the gem that proved itself without a market. Alexandrite didn't return to value through demand. It returned through proof. Found first in the Russian Urals in 1830, this chrysoberyl variant, capable of shifting from emerald green in daylight to ruby red under incandescent light, became a symbol of Imperial Russia itself. Named after Tsar Alexander II, it was mined for less than a century before vanishing from circulation following the fall of the Romanovs. What remained were heirlooms, not trade goods. Alexandrite became memory, unset stones in damaged lockets, faded entries in estate ledgers, unclaimed safes in Geneva and St. Petersburg. It disappeared from the market not because no one wanted it, but because no one knew where it still existed. And then came the rediscoveries. In Brazil, Sri Lanka, and India, new deposits surfaced in the late 20th century, but none matched the vivid, binary shift of the original Russian material. The best Brazilian stones displayed green to pink transitions. Sri Lankan stones shifted more gently, often toward a gray hue. Yet the legend persisted, that Russian Alexandrite, unheated, untreated, and larger than 2 carats, still held the most definitive change. Those few stones, buried in private inventories, suddenly mattered again. Not because auction houses declared it, but because collectors and private asset managers began verifying what could not be faked. Alexandrite is uniquely immune to manipulation. Its color change can't be synthesized with precision. Lab-grown stones exist, but they never match the sheer clarity of natural stones. That physical truth, a binary visible change, became a kind of non-verbal authentication. It allowed the gem to bypass certificates, appraisals, and even market consensus. If a stone shifts visibly, sharply, reliably, it verifies itself, and that made it ideal for silent holding. In private asset transfers, particularly in Moscow, Istanbul, and Dubai, Alexandrites are not traded by the gram or carat, but by change, the strength of shift, the absence of treatment, the credibility of origin. Some stones function as collateral, others as guarantees inside deals that never touch legal paper. Because while the world argued over price charts and grading curves, Alexandrite did something no other gemstone could. It revealed itself only when the light changed, and that made it irreplaceable, even when no one was watching. Rank number 2, Kashmir Sapphire. The price was never the point. No new Kashmir sapphires have entered the world since the 1930s. The mine collapsed, the valley closed, and the geopolitical fault line around it made exploration impossible. All that exists today, every stone labeled Kashmir, either came from that narrow 5-year window in the late 19th century or does not belong to the name at all. For those who own them, the debate is irrelevant. Ownership is not about verification, it's about continuity. The original sapphires, mined by hand at altitudes over 14,000 feet, never passed through commercial systems. They were not cataloged. They were assigned, appointed, and embedded in ceremonial regalia, royal archives, or inherited through bloodlines that now no longer claim them publicly. Their value was not set by carat weight or market timing, but by geography, a valley that stopped producing long before modern gemology could intervene. Today, a Kashmir sapphire that surfaces in an open auction is either recycled or misattributed. The real stones, the 4, 6, 8 carat deep velvet blues with intact provenance, do not surface. They remain inside vaults, in old Swiss banks with no digital trace, in estate jewelry never reappraised for modern sale, in clauses of wills that forbid resale. There is no pricing model for them because the market has no say. Every Kashmir sapphire with confirmed origin and unmodified structure is, in effect, beyond negotiation. For wealth managers in Geneva, Dubai, and Singapore, these stones function not as an investment but as insulation, not from volatility but from visibility. A 7-carat Kashmir with full provenance, never mounted, requires no insurance, no export license, no public record. It simply transfers across time, across generations, across systems, and in doing so, it escapes them all. Kashmir sapphire does not behave like an asset. It behaves like a truth, one that is never updated, never questioned, and never meant to be sold. In first place, musgravite. When ownership replaces meaning, Musgravite is not understood. It is not measured by demand, nor held for beauty, nor interpreted through any of the conventional languages used to assess gems. It has no origin myth, no market debut, no museum timeline. Its appearance in mineralogical literature was an act of classification, not revelation. First identified in 1967 from the Musgrave Ranges of Australia, the mineral was separated from Tsavorite based on marginal shifts in optical refraction. No one sought it. No one traded it. And for over 4 decades, no one possessed it. Then, without announcement, it entered the architecture of ultra-private wealth. What musgravite offered was not scarcity. Scarcity implies something others might desire. It offered singularity. Stones confirmed as musgravite, over 3 carats, untreated and supported by double lab certification from institutions such as SSEF and GRS, number fewer than 20 worldwide. Some estimate fewer than 10. Their locations are not public. Their provenance is not known. And none of them are mounted. They are not worn. They do not enter vaults for display. They are itemized against sealed instruments, escrow frameworks, and beneficiary transfers that fall outside regulated asset classes. Their ownership is not transactional, it is structural. Musgravite cannot be priced. There are no comparable lots, no public auctions, no synthetic alternatives that pass molecular spectrometry. Color ranges from smoky olive to metallic gray-violet, none of which present well under commercial lighting. It absorbs light without returning brilliance, a visual behavior that renders it unsuitable for the public imagination and ideal for invisibility. It does not participate in market systems because no system has yet been able to commodify it. There are no promotional standards, no classification grades, no consensus on how its value should be expressed, because that value is not meant to be expressed. It is intended to be preserved. In one recorded instance, a musgravite over 6 carats was included in a bilateral asset exchange involving legacy insurance offset and non-liquid transfer valuation, collateralized against a revenue-generating energy estate in the North Sea. The stone was not appraised, it was authenticated, sealed, and referenced as an immutable object. Its presence served not as decoration, but as an anchor, a weight without external meaning. That transaction was not made public. It was not required to be. And that precisely is what musgravite facilitates. Ownership where regulation ends, where symbolism breaks down, and where control no longer needs to justify itself. Musgravite is not a luxury. Luxury demands visibility. Musgravite demands silence. It is not rare, like emeralds, spinels, or even grandidierite. It falls beyond those categories as it lies outside the narrative. It has no audience, no market, no fiction. It is not for storytelling, it is for permanence. These stones were never advertised. They weren't priced for retail, certified for mass appraisal, or introduced into liquidity. They were selected, case by case, owner by owner, not for speculation, but for insulation. Not because they outperformed gold, but because they outmaneuvered every system designed to measure it. Wealth doesn't just creep. Sometimes it chooses not to move at all. Let us know which one resonates with you in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.